Okay, welcome to everyone to today's webinar. My name is Amy Toner, and I am the Executive Director of the NATSO Foundation. I just wanted to do a few quick announcements before we get started. Everyone's lines are muted. They can send in questions in the Q&A, which we'll tackle at the end. We're recording this, and we will definitely post it to NATSO's YouTube channel and share it with everyone in addition to the presentation. Blink Charging is a chairman circle of NATSO and a big supporter of us in the industry. And we're just really fortunate that you guys are here today to do this presentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley. Thanks for joining us today. We are the Blink team, and we will be walking through a bit of the National EV Infrastructure Act that's been put in place and what are the requirements essentially for getting DC fast charging at your property. First things first, I'd love for each of the speakers to introduce themselves. My name is Ashley, as I've mentioned. I am the Senior Manager of the Real Estate and Site Acquisition team here at Blink. And I'm based in Southern California. Brett?
Good morning, folks, or good afternoon, depending on where you might be located. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, just south of Seattle a little bit, so it is still late morning for me. It's nice to be with you today and happy to present with you a little bit about the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. I'll pass this to Chris.
Hi, everyone. Chris Skitch here. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm the Site Acquisition Manager for Blink, working with Ashley and Brett.
So here's just a bit of our agenda. We're going to kind of walk through basically the basics of who we are as a company at Blink, some of the growth we're seeing in the EV market, a little bit more in depth. Brett is going to cover some of the different laws and government grants that are going on that are allowing funding for EV charging infrastructure. And then Chris is going to share a little bit more in detail about our chargers, what that looks like on your property, and other non-NEVI funding opportunities. So to get started, who we are as Blink, we're in over 27 countries. We're founded in 2009, making us one of the original EV charging companies on the market, especially in America. Our headquarters are out of Miami Beach, Florida. However, we are also largely present in Tempe, Florida. We have our manufacturing plant in Bowie, Maryland, and we also have an office in Los Angeles. So beyond the States, we are in Belgium, the Netherlands. We have quite a large presence in the UK, Tel Aviv, Seoul, South Korea, and India. This is just a bit of an overview of some of our partnerships. Blink is proud to have worked with a multitude of different providers. As we're going to go over a bit later, we have a wide variety of solutions with which our partnerships are allowed to pull from. So because we offer both L2s and DC fast chargers, it gives us the ability to work with all different types of businesses, whether it be multifamilies or just like a quick convenience store. We have the ability to provide charging needs to really whatever kind of quick or long stay people are having their customers come to. Here's a couple of our products. Chris is going to go into this a bit later, but we also provide residential. So we have a residential charger for people who just want to charge at home in their single family residence. Additionally, we have the Series 6, 7, and 8, which you'll normally see in either commercial real estate or multifamily setting. This is the charger that will charge your car in between 6 to 8 hours. It's the most common type of chargers we'll see. And then we'll see also what is more fitted to NATSO, which is the DCFC 60 kilowatt to 360 kilowatt charger. This will charge a car in roughly 30 minutes. We're seeing it more present at gas stations, C-stores, and really off of corridors, what we're seeing for NEVI. So this is really what's going to be present in the NEVI program and what we'll be talking about today. Blink also has a network, which is quite amazing. I think this is really the bread and butter of what Blink does, is not only do we manufacture our own chargers in-house, but we also have an amazing system in which you're able to basically control and operate the chargers, you have all different types of data and reporting. You're able to see who's charging, how long they're charging. You're able to control idle fees. So if somebody charges beyond the point of when you would want them to be there and their car is fully charged and they're just sitting there parked, you're able to basically incentivize people to move. We've also started with this idea of waitlisting so people can be able to get in line so they can have their next spot to charge when they pull up. So there's a high functioning number of things that Blink Network does, and we continue to improve and integrate our system continuously. And now we'll just talk a bit about EV market trends. This is something that people are seeing. It's at one point it was something we just talked about in theory, right? It was like, we know that EVs are going to grow and build in the market, but we're seeing it. I personally live in Southern California, and I'd say probably 1 in 4 cars that I see is now an electric vehicle. We've really bridged the gap. They say that once you hit 5%, what we've seen in other countries is you go straight shot to 30 in EV adoption. And so as we're seeing, there's like over 3.9 million EVs in the US, and that number just keeps growing. We're going to see the rise for this in trucking as well. The adoption is coming. The technology is here. So it's something to now be aware of. I think this is one of those conversations where, and I'm sure Brett and Chris would love to chime in on this, but the future is really here when it comes to trucking. We're seeing the batteries, we're seeing the power, and we're seeing the adoption happen. So we expect adoption to escalate between 2024 and 2035. Yeah. And I'll hand it over to Brett.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, so just a little bit of a big picture background here. So the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program was created through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. You may be more familiar with it as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. But the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law allocates $350 billion for highway programs focused primarily on infrastructure improvements and job creation across the United States. This is actually the largest U.S. infrastructure investment in our nation's history. So through the NEVI program, the legislation provides $7.5 billion in funding to deploy EV chargers along highway corridors to facilitate long distance travel, as well as within communities to provide convenient charging where people live, work, and shop. Get just a little bit of a drink here, folks. There you go. Next slide, please, Ashley. There's actually 2 components that folks are of interest in here. One is the formula funding program, and this portion of NEVI, I think, is what's getting probably the most attention. It allocates funds according to specific formula to states and Puerto Rico and DC to develop the charging infrastructure along interstates, US routes, and state highways. These funds are transferred over 5 years to states to administer and develop grant programs according to certain criteria. These funds will roll out through 2026. Eligibility wise, you can see there's a broad scope of who can actually apply for these grants that the states will roll out, from corporations to government entities and private businesses. The second portion of the NEVI program is what's referred to as the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program. $2.5 billion are allocated to this program, which awards competitive grants to fill gaps. Otherwise, it might not be covered through the formula program, as well as taking charging infrastructure further into the community, even a little bit further away from those alternative fuel corridors, which I'll talk about in just a moment. There are 2 programs within the charging and fueling infrastructure. One, again, focuses on communities. The other is corridors. And these particular grants under this program are directly facilitated through federal highways to the states. Next slide, please, Ashley. talk just for a few minutes. You hear a lot about alternative fuel corridors, so I'll touch on this just for a few minutes. This is actually a program that Federal Highways developed, I believe, in 2015 to facilitate infrastructure, alternative fuel infrastructure across our nation's highways. In this case, what we're talking about specifically is electric vehicle charging to support transportation for EV drivers. Alternative fuel corridors can be further developed over time. So states actually nominate alternative fuel corridors to be approved by Federal Highways. So what we see today is alternative fuel corridors. There could be more in the future as states nominate for approval on an annual basis with Federal Highways. Next slide, please. Here's a list. I'll just highlight a couple of pieces on this particular slide. Under the NEVI program, there are federal minimum standards and requirements that Federal Highways has adopted as law. So states have to invest these funds according to certain criteria and under certain parameters. Just I'll highlight a couple here. For example, each location must have at least 4 charging ports at 150 kW per port. So what that means at the location is you will see a minimum requirement needing 4 parking stalls plus enough access for ADA accessibility. Another criteria that's going to be a really important one that states will be working on is to ensure 97% uptime for these chargers, as well as significant data reporting on the utilization of the chargers. And another very important criteria is that charger locations have to be within 1 mile of an alternative fuel corridor under the formula funding program. Next slide, Ashley. I just want to give you a little bit of an example. I mentioned that states are administrating the formula funding program. States actually have to submit for approval to Federal Highways a plan for their state every year. It has to be approved for them every year. So over the 5-year program, states will be developing, identifying their strategy for rolling out this infrastructure. And here's an example. The Florida just closed an RFP, I believe it was last week. And you can see here what Florida did. They assessed and estimated approximately 50 miles. You can see the blue dots on their map to start filling these corridor gaps. And then they zeroed in and looked more closely within the 1 mile of where that 50-mile increment might be and identified how many chargers they thought might be necessary to facilitate interstate travel at these locations. The other thing I want to mention is that states must abide by the minimum standards and requirements, but in some cases, they can go beyond the minimum standards and requirements. And as competitive grants and a competitive RFP process, what we saw out of Texas was they increased in some locations how many chargers might be required, as well as they incentivized points for certain components and aspects of going beyond these minimum standards and requirements. See, Ashley? I'm going to talk just a little bit more for a minute or so about the charging and fueling infrastructure program, also known as the discretionary grants program. So under this program, it really is only states and local government agencies, metropolitan planning organizations, tribes, et cetera, that can apply for these funds through Federal Highways. This is a direct access to those public entities to these funds. They will then develop through their processes procurement avenues to distribute these funds in their jurisdictions, in their communities. The requirements are slightly different, although they include the ones I mentioned earlier. In these cases, you can include level 2 AC chargers. They can go beyond or further into the community than the alternative fuel corridor, and a few other highlights here. Go ahead, Ashley. And I'll pass this now to Chris.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of EV charging, some of Blink's business models, and also some of the various grants that are available to you guys. So for the public sector, attract new and green-minded residents to your community, as well as environmentally conscious businesses. By doing so, not only are you establishing yourself as a leader in clean transportation, but also enhancing community sustainability, green living initiatives, and improving air quality, and also reducing CO2 emissions in your community. Public sector EV charging benefits also include supporting rural, disadvantaged, and hard-to-reach communities. There are also a number of incentives around this area that we'll discuss a little bit later on. We'll pop to the next slide for private sector. So benefits to the private sector, attracting and creating loyalty while EV drivers charge, adding to existing sustainability efforts in your location, and also appealing to new environmentally conscious customers. EV charging investment is also communicating to your community that your facility is on the leading edge of technology. It demonstrates leadership in adapting new green initiatives, and is also actually helping to improve air quality and reduction in carbon emissions, of course, throughout your community. And let's not forget additional revenue too. Next slide, please. So in terms of return on investment, you're going to attract new drivers and have increased footfall rates to your communities and businesses. This is the Tesla sales pitch. We've noticed they tend to argue that EV drivers have an income of 2 times the national average. And research has shown that between 60 and 89% of EV drivers will make some kind of retail purchase while they're charging, depending on who you ask. You're also able to generate charging revenue. Blink has a number of different business models with guaranteed minimum revenues, which I'll get to shortly. But don't forget brand loyalty and repeat custom. It's known that 28% of EV drivers use public chargers weekly, especially residential homeowners with more than one EV in the household, because most likely the other car is going to need somewhere to charge to. I'll now go on to talk about the step-by-step processes with Blink. This slide is quite short because we're going to go into some of the business models in the next one, but just to wrap this one up, Blink basically provides a state-of-the-art equipment with zero to low upfront costs, rev share opportunities, electricity reimbursement through our built-in utility grade meters within the chargers themselves, as well as robust real-time tracking network, which Ashley mentioned, and 24/7 support, which really makes Blink stand out from the rest. I know for a fact, just from dealing with my customers who've dealt with other EV charging providers, so that support is a really big deal, and it's a huge frustration for many people who have chargers that are not working properly. So let's jump onto the next slide. We can dive into Blink's business models. So here are the 4 main business models for non-NEVI opportunities. Blink can offer you guys a menu of different EV charging solutions depending on your need. There are 4 main businesses to choose from, or business models to choose from: host-owned, Blink as a service, a hybrid business model, and Blink-owned, or turnkey, as we like to call it. The last 2, hybrid-owned and Blink-owned, require site approval or internal approval from Blink. So starting with a host-owned, this is where you as the host will buy the equipment outright, set your own charging prices, and have full control of who, where, and for how long you want to have those chargers in the ground. Blink as a service is a monthly subscription starting from as little as $99 a month. You provide the infrastructure and location, and Blink provides the rest. You also get to keep 100% of the charging revenue of this model. A lot of our large institutional, public, and educational customers prefer this approach because it's just kind of hands off, less headache. Just pay the subscription fee and Blink will take care of it. And moving on to the hybrid and Blink-owned ones, which require site approval. The hybrid, here you partner with Blink to share the infrastructure costs, and then you let Blink provide the hardware. This model significantly reduces your upfront capex to get the power to the site, and helps to get chargers in the ground where you need them, as well as a 60/40 revenue split with Blink, which is quite nice as well. So finally, the Blink-owned or turnkey model. is a zero capex option, costs you nothing. Generally, sites need to be sitting in a high traffic or high EV utilization area, but there are exceptions to that. Blink will come in and pay for 100% of that infrastructure and provide all the equipment. And we also give our host a token 5% split as well. This and the hybrid obviously need approval, but I'm happy to take any questions you guys have on that. If you want to pop them in the Q&A, we can discuss later on. So let's go to grants and rebates, Ash. So grants and rebates and tax credits that are available right now are quite extensive across the country. We're going to talk about a couple here. A number of different incentives available for businesses like yours interested in deploying EV infrastructure. These can come in the form of grants, rebates, or tax credits. They can come from a federal level like NEVI, which Brett just kind of ran through, and also state government, like AppD funding, local sources, and as well as utility, which is actually quite a large one, especially in states on the East Coast like New York. On top of this, your business may be eligible for a federal tax credit, quote unquote, it's called, which is part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Businesses located in eligible census tracts may receive a base credit of up to 6%, up to $100,000 per charger. The next slide, please, Ash. We'll go into a little bit more detail on that. Here's like a map of the various incentives and funding that's available. I'm going to just drill into New York because that's my home state. That's the one I know best, working as a territory sales manager at Blink before joining this team. In some states like New York, you can combine an installation rebate with an equipment incentive. So you think about that, you're getting money to install the charger, and you're also going to get money for the actual charger, the hardware itself. And that's really, really powerful in states where you can combine that. So New York, for example, the joint utilities of New York have a Make Ready program, like Con Ed Make Ready, for example, where they'll pay up to 90% of the infrastructure costs for the chargers, the Make Ready, if they're publicly available, up to $7,200 per plug, which is more than covers the cost of our chargers, which are made in USA, and 50% if it's in a private parking lot. So public, you're getting, just to reiterate, public 90%, private 50%, up to $4,000 a plug, and as well as 100% incentive if you're in a disadvantaged community, which is quite good as well. And honestly, guys, the definition of disadvantaged community is very, very broad. I'd really encourage each and every one of you to look at your local maps to see where those are. I mean, there are parts of New York and Long Island, for example, that I'm familiar with, where I've had owners shocked to hear that they're in a disadvantaged community. So if you combine those programs, you're getting a substantial amount of money. In New York, $2,000, $4,000, and disadvantaged community, $8,000 per plug. Here on the map, there's a ton of other information on California, Arizona, Louisiana, West Virginia, which all have their own programs. But I would strongly encourage each and every one of you to reach out to us, Ashley, myself, or Brett, if you have any questions about your state, and we can get you in touch with the territory sales manager for Blink to go into some depth. So yeah, that's that from me. Next slide, Ash. I think we're on some questions, or where are we going now?
Yeah, so we do have a question in the chat. The first question is, how is uptime measured, site or per charger? And Brett, I believe that's for you in regards to NEVI.
Yeah, according to the minimum standards and requirements that were passed, the uptime is measured by a formula that's actually it's a per port measurement, and the formula is described in the minimum standards and requirements. So it is on a per port basis.
Thank you, Brett. And the second question is, I assume that under the hybrid ownership model that Blink receives the rebates and grants. Chris, do you want to go ahead and answer that one?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Each case is kind of case by case, depends where the location is. If we can get those grants and rebates, that's a discussion we'll have with each individual site holder. And so traditionally the revenue split is 60-40 there. And we're obviously open to having a conversation around that. So fully depends where you are, but we're very, you know, we want to make a deal with you guys. So it's on a case by case basis, but great question.
That's it for the questions. Does anybody else have a question that they would like us to go over or address pertaining to Nevi or Blink or the multitude of business models that we have, some of our chargers? Okay. Well, it seems like we've covered it all. Amy,
I'm here. Make myself visible.
Oh,
Here you
I
go.
think-
It always happens when we say we're all done, no more questions, and new questions come in. Looks like you got a couple.
yeah, I will. So the next question is, do you have a financial model to show profitability of DC fast chargers? Chris, can you talk a bit about our ROI calculator?
So just popping some details in the chat there. So say that again with a profitability said.
Can you talk a bit about our ROI calculator for how it works and how it functions for our DC fast chargers?
I can speak to the L2 side a bit more on that. Brett, do you know about the DCFC ROI side? I can definitely speak to the L2, where typically a good charger, going back to one of our business models like the hybrid or turnkey or whatever else, you're looking to make about a good charge, make 100 to $200 a month. And then that will be split. The utility cost will come out of that, and that will be distributed depending on which model it is. The DCFC stuff, I think that's kind of TBD. Brett, do you have any word on that?
I think about the best we could say is probably it's on a case by case basis. You know, we have to look at a variety of things, including utility demand charges. You know, the amount of infrastructure that actually has to go into development of the site, and a variety of things. So it really is, there is no crystal clear one answer.
Yes, I can add a little bit more to that. So I think it's good to point out here as well that the profitability and stuff for Nevi is very, very different, because that's DCFC. So all those business models that we discussed and rev share and profitability don't apply so much. Like we typically will pay our hosts a small fee to be there, or a rent per stall to be there for DCFC. So in terms of profitability, I would just kind of direct you to the L2, the level 2, the Series 7 and the Series 8 products we have, where you can expect to get around 100 to $200, maybe more in some cases, per charger per month. And that will be distributed depending on which business model you have. And I put my email in the chat there, everyone. If you have any questions, or if you want to be connected with your local rep for your state who can give you some more details about the incentives, please drop me a line. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I'll just add to that one more bit of the ROI calculators. As Brett had mentioned with DCFCs, we do have ROI calculators that exist. However, as Brett mentioned, it is on a case-by-case basis. A lot of the data that we're pulling is based on EV drivers, number of EV registrations. However, something that we're growing on the technology is that, especially in corridors and with travel centers, that data can be a bit faulty, because most of the passing is coming from people outside of the region. And so a lot of that is based on maybe like a Placer AI data, or how highly trafficked your site is. And also, I think a lot of what would be a big telltale, obviously nothing is a perfect science, is the amount of EV stations you already have in the area. Because if people are passing by and there isn't any other option, the likelihood of people charging at your convenience store or your gas station or your travel center is naturally going to be much higher. Anyways, so we do have another question.
Actually, I can just add to some flavor to that really good point you just made about travel centers and rest stops and that kind of thing. Interestingly, I love this fact. Blink's highest utilized charger is at a rest stop in New Jersey on I-95. So these are prime places where people stop to charge their car, look for amenities, buy a coffee, buy a pint of milk, as we say where I'm from. And yeah, I just wanted to add that actually.
Thanks, Chris. Next question. If the work has already started, would it be possible to still apply for a grant? Brett?
Typically, in this is, I would even go a little bit further than typically. It's almost a rule that expenses that are made prior to an award are typically not eligible for funding. So there's a pretty hard line. I don't believe I have seen a grant funding opportunity where it would pay you for work that you had already done before an award was made.
Brett, can you elaborate a little bit on existing equipment in NEVI and how that works?
Yeah, so I just wanted to chat for a minute. I think you might be referring to the question about mitigation strategies for demand charges here. So under the NEVI minimum standards and requirements, battery storage and solar are considered eligible for funding. So it is a factor that can be considered again on a site by site basis in terms of, is there a decent footprint for the battery storage as well as the solar equipment, and are the states choosing to actually fund and incentivize that? So there are some options to help mitigate demand fees, but we really look to what the state has identified as their focus in their RFP, and some of them may be fully incentivizing that, others may not.
Ash, I can take the one about the cost. Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, so the next question is, what are the equipment costs for DCFCs? Chris, if you could answer that as well as explain sort of the way that structure would be, especially because this is supposed to be around NEVI. You want to address the costs of equipment, but also what our specialty leasing would look like if it's a NEVI site.
I think I was going to speak to the costs of buying a DCFC outright, because we offer such a large variety of products there, from 30 kW all the way to 360. And I think basically the floor price you need to know for 30 kW is around $30,000, and it going all the way up to 100,000 plus for 360 kW. But in regards to NEVI, what this will be, it's not really something you guys have to worry about. It will be on Blink to worry about, and there'll be some kind of rent payment there to facilitate that.
I'll just elaborate very, very briefly on Chris's last comment there. The NEVI grants, again, according to the minimum standards and requirements, is that the grant can be as much as 80%, with a 20% match coming in from the applicant itself. In our case, Blink would be covering that 20% match, and we are seeing some states that are offering less than the 80%. Some locations in California, it seems as though they're on a path or on a track to only incentivize 50%, and therefore require a 50% match. So again, as long as states meet those minimum standards and requirements, they can be a little bit more flexible depending on how they feel they need to build out the infrastructure.
And I just want to pull back this slide for a second. I know Chris had covered it, but it's quite a lucrative opportunity to believe that maybe $500,000 of infrastructure and EV chargers could be placed in your property for essentially no cost to you. So I just kind of want to give you guys a bit of an overview. I know we've talked about it a bit of what that actually looks like in the process. So and Brett can speak to this as well, but essentially what we do first as a company at Bleak is we put our resources together and we try to use our data and analytics to assess what sites would be the right location to place a fast charger and what we think would be the best to win the application with the state. And then essentially we would speak with you guys if you guys were interested in having a charger at your location for NEVI. We would essentially reach out and say, are you interested in signing an LOI? Which is, to be honest, quite non-binding. It's just basically saying we're interested in having chargers at our location if they're to be awarded. And from there, we will essentially, Brett's team will submit an application. and we can essentially see if we get approved. If we are approved, then we'll come back and speak with you about the contract. Blink will do all of the upfront work, including permitting, zoning, utility coordination, everything that needs to be done. In the meantime, we'll execute that contract, and once we have, we can work towards installation. Normally, the process is roughly about a year from application approval to installation. But once it's done, again, really we're covering all of the work that needs to be done. And then we're essentially just paying you a monthly rent to operate our business and provide the amenity at your location. Brett, is there anything you want to fill in the gaps of how that process goes?
No, I think you covered it, actually. Thank you.
We have another question. Does NEVI funding cover in areas that are more than 50 miles from the interstate, but 1 mile from a state or federal highway?
Yeah, so let me just kind of go back and maybe put a finer point on the earlier slide. Under the formula program, so long as it's a designated, federal highways designated alternative fuel corridor, which could be an interstate, it could be a state highway. NEVI funds could fund, chargers. The goal is to fill every 50-mile gap on that alternative fuel corridor within 1 mile of that alternative fuel corridor. So that's under the formula program. Again, the goal is every 50 miles. Some states, we are getting the impression from New Jersey that they may be trying to install chargers every 25 miles, which they can do so long as they meet the minimum standard and requirement. So under the charging and fueling infrastructure grant, yes, you can go further than a mile from that alternative fuel corridor under that particular program.
Awesome. Thank you, Brett.
So Ash, I just wanted to answer Barry's question. I popped in the chat there, Barry, what state are you in? But I can just go ahead and answer that anyway. Basically, in terms of rip and replace, depending on what state you're in, you might be eligible for some grants or rebates to cover that cost. But no, the NEVI stuff is DCFC. So in terms of existing Blink and SemiConnect product, please reach out to us. I'll put my email in the chat. And again, I'll direct that to the appropriate person, and we can discuss getting that replaced for you. Thanks, Barry.
And actually, I'll grab this last question just briefly here. Yes, existing chargers, upgrading them under the NEVI program is eligible.
Oh, Brett, I just answered that.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're good on that. Unless anyone has any more questions on rip and replace and NEVI DCFC, please let us know.
All right. I think that's all the questions. Thanks so much, guys. We'll be sending out the presentation and the recording and all your contact information. And we really appreciate everyone tuning in and you guys for being great speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.